Welcome to the Virtual Field Trips Educator Training. This video will prepare you for being a virtual field trip educator. However, this is not the only video that you need to complete your training. It is important that you find the Virtual Field Trip Educator as well as the Virtual Field Trip Cart Driver script in Moodle and read those in its entirety. You will also be responsible for watching the Virtual Field Trip Cart Driving training video. Let's get started. We'll first do a brief introduction to virtual field trips, what they are, what they look like, what your responsibilities will be. First of all, if you're interested in learning more about our virtual field trips, you can find them on our website, dhhrm.org, or at this link here. It'll bring you directly to our virtual field trip brochure. We offer 4 unique virtual field trips. There are 1-hour specialized tours in which you spend 1 hour in a specific wing. So 1 hour in the Holocaust Shoah wing, 1 hour in the Human Rights wing, or 1 hour in the Pivot to America wing. Alternatively, there is a 90-minute highlight tour of the full exhibition. This tour moves quickly through all 3 wings and therefore is considered a highlight tour because of course you cannot cover all information in all 3 wings and see the memorial room as well. Virtual field trips are a really unique opportunity for teachers, and these 1-hour specialized tours are really utilized as they fit really well in a single class period. I recommend checking out our virtual field trip brochure at this link here because it gives a little bit more information of what teachers should expect prior to booking their virtual field trip. It also includes prices, TEKS alignment, and things like this. First and foremost, what is a cart? A cart, as you can see in this image here, is simply an iPad on a tripod. So we have our iPad up here, our tripod, which is on wheels, and it's a little tricky to see in this image, but our tripod actually has a handle that uses to push and to basically navigate throughout the museum. We use Zoom as our streaming platform because, of course, this is one of the most used platforms at the time, but it also has really good connection. Furthermore, there is a headset, and this will be worn by you, the educator. So you can see in this image here, we have our educator with a headset. You are still required at this time to wear a mask as you teach. And the other note about the headset is that you'll note there's only one. This makes things a little tricky so that our educator, you, can hear what the students are asking if they choose to unmute and ask, but you cannot see the cart, right? You are in front of the cart. The cart driver, on the other hand, the second person, is seeing the students' chats, but they cannot hear as they themselves are not wearing a headset. This is a function of Zoom. It cannot be worked around, meaning we cannot add another headset. However, we found ways to overcome this issue, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as we go. What are the major responsibilities of each individual associated with the tour? So as you can see here, each virtual field trip requires 3 people to assist. The reason for that is that all of our tours are live and interactive. We encourage student questions, we ask students questions themselves, we do polls, we do artifact interactions, we do photo analysis. So really it takes a whole group of people to ensure that this is both live, interactive, as well as secure, right? So we'll first start with your responsibilities as educator in training. First, you will assist the cart driver with setup. This is really important. You may be interested in virtual field trips because you want to be the educator, the person giving the historical information. However, we make it necessary that you learn not just the educator position, but also the cart driver position. This will assist in, allowing you to better understand what your cart driver is dealing with, but it also will allow us to better cover these virtual field trips. So you'll be responsible for knowing how to help the cart driver set up, and you'll figure this out by watching the virtual field trip cart driver training video and completing the virtual field trip cart driver quiz on Moodle. Next, you will welcome, introduce, and explain the tour. You will give historical information throughout the virtual field trip. You will answer student questions, and you will really be the leader of the movement of the tour. You will be responsible for guiding the cart driver from stop to stop. On the other hand, the cart driver has a set of responsibilities, which of course you should be aware of as well. First and foremost, cart driver sets up the cart, which means starting Zoom, admitting the security person and making them co-host, renaming themselves, and connecting the headset. The cart driver follows the educator and shows the objects or panels being discussed. They relay the questions from the chat to the educator, and they are responsible for playing the videos. And finally, we have a third individual. This person can be working remotely from home or from the office, and they are the polls or security person. This person also handles attendance. Their responsibility is to admit students from the waiting room, mute participants and turn off their video, assist the cart driver with security of the meeting, as well as to launch polls. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in a few. How do you go about signing up for a tour? In order to sign up for a tour, or even just to see which tours are taking place within the next month or so, you can go to this link here. This is our virtual field trip sign-up spreadsheet, and in this spreadsheet you can see a ton of information. So let's break this down. On this spreadsheet you can see it is color-coded. We have pink for in-person tours, yellow for education programs, but what you are going to focus on only is these blue programs. So programs in blue are virtual field trips. In addition to the date and time of said virtual field trip, you can also see which virtual field trip it is. So is it a specialized 1-hour human rights tour like this here, or it might say a 90-minute full tour. So you can know which wing or which virtual field trip you'll be touring. You can also see the name of the school or the ISD, the approximate grade, and how many participants you are expecting for that tour. This again is an approximate number and could change depending on the class, etc. You'll also notice on here there is a number, as you can see, 231 on this sheet. This notes the number cart that you are grabbing. It is essential that you note this number and keep it in mind. And the reason for that is that each cart is connected to a different Zoom account. So cart 1 will show different meetings in Zoom than cart 2, etc., etc. If you have more questions about this, please see the cart driver training video on Moodle. And in this row here, we have the sign up. I guess the next 2 rows are considered the sign up. So you can see what position and whether that position is open for new signups. So on this tour on January 4th, we have our tour educator position open. You would simply, once you are evaluated and ready to begin your virtual field trip educating, you will click on where it says open, type your name. This ensures that you are signed up for that particular virtual field trip. Further information on the right, you also have the Zoom meeting ID for folks who are joining from home, as well as the roster. Again, this isn't particularly important for you as much as the attendance, polls, and roster person. But it is essential that you keep in mind who your cart driver is, who your attendance person is, so that you know what to expect for the upcoming tour. A lot of virtual field trip educators like to keep in mind what students know ahead of time. Baseline rule, assume they know nothing. Teachers are given access to tons and tons of resources ahead of time from us directly, and I'll talk a little bit about what exactly we give them ahead of time. But for the most part, we cannot guarantee that they used the resources they were given. So if you have time at the beginning of your tour, let's say your teacher jumps on, early, 5 minutes early, and you would like to ask whether or not they have utilized any of these resources or whether they've read books related to the topic, you're more than welcome to do so. But for the most part, it's best to assume that they know nothing and they're starting from scratch. So depending on the wing, of course, teachers are given different pieces of information and resources. Every single tour, every single wing is given access to a link to watch the orientation film. The orientation film is what you would see if you are at the museum, you enter the orientation theater. It introduces those 4 behavior types, right? Upstander, bystander, victim, and perpetrator, and it gives a little background, a brief background to the history of anti-Semitism. So, they have access to watch this. They also have access to wing-specific vocabulary. So for the full tour, they'd be given access to all 3 wing vocabulary, but if they're booking just a Holocaust Shoah wing tour, they'll be given the Holocaust Shoah vocabulary. And this includes both a worksheet and a Prezi presentation similar to a PowerPoint, which allows teachers to present this vocabulary in class prior to their arrival at the museum. And then we have wing-specific resources. So in the Holocaust Shoah wing, when teachers book this tour, they're given access, once again, remember, to the orientation film, to the vocabulary, but also to a link to watch the Rise of Nazism film. This is a 11-minute film, and you can watch it yourself in the Germany gallery on the far wall next to kind of the Kindertransport 1938 panels. For the Human Rights Wing, they're given access to the orientation film, the vocabulary, and some quick bite videos, including what are human rights, what are the 10 stages of genocide, as well as, of course, access to the 10 stages of genocide graphic novels. So when you are given a Human Rights Wing tour, that they already have the link to access those graphic novels. So if at any point you want to refer to them, you can say your teacher has gotten a link to access these graphic novels. And finally, in Pivot, teachers are given a link to watch the orientation film, they're given a link to the vocabulary, and they're also given a link to watch the What is an Upstander quick bite video presented by a museum educator. Again, teachers are given all these resources, and after the tour, they also have access to a number of discussion questions that they can use in the classroom, as well as post-tour resources and post-tour materials that they can use to take their tour one step further. However, again, remember, we don't necessarily know if teachers are actually using these resources, so for the sake of the tour, assume they have seen none of this. Again, repetition doesn't really hurt. General information. Things will go wrong. Almost guaranteed things will go wrong. We're using technology, we are using Wi-Fi, there are tons of kids both in person at the museum and on the Zoom. So things are guaranteed to go wrong. It's okay, stay calm. The children understand, the teachers understand, we're all in the same boat. Try your best to stay calm and solve the issues as they come up. This is new to you and to the students. Be understanding. Similar to how you would hope that they would understand if things go wrong, you have to understand that students might join late. Teachers might not be able to hook up the sound to their projector. Be understanding, allow them to take the time that they need to connect, Even if it means you have to shorten your already very short tour, really try your best to put on your customer service face and be understanding. Watch your time. This will never change. You must end at the designated end time. This is for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, there's a good chance that the class period will be ending at that designated end time, and therefore the students will have to leave the meeting. So there's that. Also, the CART or Zoom account that you are on might need to be used right immediately after the end of your tour. So again, it's important that you end at that designated end time. And we let the teachers know this ahead of time as well. Next, practice. Shadow other tours. Set up time with me to come practice. If you don't have an iPad to practice on at home, email me and we can set up time for you to come practice on the iPad in the museum. Follow along tours, either in person or virtual. We'll talk about that at the end, what that'll look like. And of course, you know, come into the museum even without the cart. Walk around the museum, familiarize yourself with the stops as laid out in the educator script. And finally, shared duties. Switch between being a tour educator and a cart driver. This helps us and it helps you lead a better tour. So as much as you can, for every one educator tour you do, go ahead and do a cart driver tour as well. All right, before the tour, here are the responsibilities for which you are expected to take part in. Arrive 30 minutes before the start of the program. This ensures that you haven't hit traffic, that you're able to get the iPad up and running and up into the exhibit before students start jumping on. They're told to jump on ideally 15 minutes before the tour. Some teachers are going to join 30 minutes before the tour, some are going to join 5. But it's important that you are prepped and ready, you know, 20 minutes before the start time of the program. When you arrive, you'll go straight to the volunteer lounge. The code for the volunteer lounge is 01-27-20. So this is Holocaust Remembrance Day of 2020, January 27th. So 01-27-20. I recommend putting this in your phone. However, if you forget, you can go ahead right to the front desk and they'll hand you a slip of paper with this code on it. And then, like I mentioned, it is your responsibility to help the cart driver set up the cart. So if you are confused about this, please re-watch or watch the cart driver training video in this Moodle. So pick the correct cart, unplug the iPad, unlock the wheels, sign it out, grab the headset, and head on upstairs. Once you've got your Zoom started and your cart all set up, you can head upstairs and begin your tour. Here's some general information for your tour. First and foremost, make eye contact with the camera. This is going to feel super awkward and a little unnatural, but it really makes all the difference. So when you look at the iPad from the educator point of view, so from behind the iPad, right, you can see the camera. I believe it's in the top right corner. This is where you should look for the entirety of the tour. It really makes it feel more like you are leading a tour for the students at home. And here is really where watching and following along on a virtual field trip virtually from home via Zoom helps. You can see the difference between an educator who makes eye contact with the camera versus one who's kind of looking all over. Next, move slowly and stay in the shot. As you learned or will learn in the virtual field trip cart driver training, you are required to move very slowly when you are moving the cart so as not to make the students motion sick. However, that takes two. It takes two to tango, right? The educator should also move slowly and try their best to stay, for the most part, in the shot of the iPad. So Don't run from stop to stop. Take a leisurely stroll. We recommend walking backwards between stops and making eye contact again with the camera. But the other side of this is that you don't need to be in the shot 100% of the time. Allow the cart driver to get you in the shot if they want to, but sometimes they'll have to zoom in on an artifact or zoom in on a picture. In those cases, of course, you don't have to be in the shot. Next, explain that there are people in the museum. The museum is open, and sometimes we'll have 400 kids up in the exhibition, right? And kids understand this. Just simply say, you know, we have a lot of kids in the museum today, so we're going to do our best to move from stop to stop. And I'll make sure that, you can say, I'll make sure that I'll try my best that you can see every artifact and every picture that we're about to talk about. And kids will understand that. Be flexible and be nice to those people walking through the exhibit. So as you are walking, leading a virtual tour, don't push your way in front of walk-in visitors. Don't ask them to move out of your way. Just simply explain, excuse me folks, I'm moving in with a group of students. If you don't mind, I'll have us take a look at this artifact. And also invite them to follow along on the tour. Walk-in visitors are absolutely more than welcome to follow you and listen to what you have to say as well. This is another aspect that is pretty important to a tour. Repeat questions asked by the cart driver. So remember, students cannot hear the cart driver. You, as the educator, are the only one hooked up with a headset. So when a cart driver speaks, you must repeat all that they say. When the cart driver receives a question in the chat, they will relay it to you. But you must repeat the question so that everyone can hear the question that you are about to answer. Another note on questions, when the cart driver receives a question in the chat, they will raise their hand. It's up to you at that point to decide when you would like to call on them and when you would like to receive that question. The reason we do this hand up system is so that you can finish your thought before taking a question. So once you decide to take that question, just remember to repeat it so that every student knows what question you're answering. And finally, narrate the actions of the cart driver. For example, Casey will now play a video explaining to you what we're about to talk about in the following wing. Or Casey will have to take a bit of an unconventional path as we make our way through our busy exhibition today. Or Casey, I'm now going to ask you to come a little bit closer as we zoom in on this image looking at Kristallnacht. Things like this are totally fine and actually encouraged. It first and foremost lets the students know that there is someone behind the camera helping, but it also helps the cart driver know exactly what you want them to do. No! We'll now move into some examples about how to lead a virtual field trip. This is not a comprehensive list. We will move from wing to wing and look at some of the important stops or maybe more difficult stops and some of the education techniques you can use at each stop. However, I ask that you read the educator script in its entirety to understand which stops you are required to stop at and what information you're required to get across. Again, these are only the more difficult or more complex stops that we'll be talking about today, as well as some examples of how best to talk about these stops. So in the Holocaust Shoah Wing Tour, we will look at first the introduction, which takes place at the Shoah entrance. We will look at an example of a photo analysis at the Kristallnacht panel. We'll look at an example of an artifact analysis at the yellow patches. We will look at how best to summarize information with an example at the death camps. And finally, we'll look at how to conclude a tour in the New Homes, New Life section. So first and foremost, how to introduce a tour. We will look at an example from the Holocaust Shoah Wing, but the basic kind of layout will look the same in every single tour. So your camera person should be standing so that the image in their camera looks similar to this, and you, the educator, will stand right in front. At this point, you are responsible for doing a number of things, and honestly, the best thing to do is just memorize this list. This is really the only point where you'll have to memorize a number of bullet points. First and foremost, welcome your participants. Say welcome to the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and then introduce yourself. My name is Casey Bush, and I'm a museum educator, and we're joined today by a cart driver, and she will be moving our cart from position to position, from stop to stop, so you can see everything that we're going to talk about today. And be sure to give the name and position of your cart driver as well. If you don't know the name and position of your cart driver, ask them before the tour so that you can introduce them. Then you're going to explain to students how they can ask questions throughout the tour. Explain that this is a really interactive tour and you want to hear their feedback and you want to hear their questions, and they can do so in two ways. The first way is to unmute and ask directly to the educator. Remember, you're wearing a headset, so if a student unmutes, you can hear their question directly in your ear. The other way that they can ask a question is to type the question into the chat. Your cart driver will see this question in the chat, and they will then know to raise their hand and ask you, the educator, to answer the question. At this point, remember, you are going to want to repeat that question. This way, if the question was asked privately, now everyone knows which question is being answered. So explain to students how they can ask questions either by unmuting or typing in the chat, and then introduce the tour. Explain we are in the Holocaust Shoah Wing. Today we're going to learn a little bit about the Holocaust. At this point, you might want to give the introduction or definition of upstanders, but here you're of course going to want to introduce the term Holocaust, again, assuming that students don't know anything. One way to gauge whether they do know a little bit about this topic is to ask students, does anybody know what the Holocaust was? Or you can ask, what words come to mind when you hear the term Holocaust? And at that point, pause. Allow students to give answers, either in the chat or unmuting. The cart driver should read back some answers to you, go ahead and repeat them out loud. And then once you've gathered, 2, 3, maybe even 5 or 6 words that they associate with the Holocaust, go ahead and give the museum's definition. The definition that we use at the museum is put here, and again, it's important that you remember and hit the major points of this definition, particularly that first sentence. Finally, let the students know that we will now be beginning the tour and the cart will start moving. At this point, I typically let them know that the cart driver will do their best to ensure that we have a smooth ride. However, the cart can be a little shaky, so just to be calm and patient as we move from stop to stop. And if you want to get technical, you can ask if the students are ready, and if they're ready, to give a digital thumbs up. This will ensure that they can hear you okay, that they can see you okay, and that they're ready to begin the tour. As I mentioned, this introduction is very similar for every single tour. In particular, this is identical to your introduction to the Human Rights Wing. We ask that you give the definition of the Holocaust in the Human Rights Wing tour, because you will start by talking about the International Military Tribunal, and then of course it is essential that they do have some idea of what the Holocaust was. For Pivot, of course, you'll do the same logistical information, but instead of giving a definition to the Holocaust, you can give a definition maybe to an upstander, or what Pivot to America is really going to look like, right? It is looking at civil and human rights in the US, and particularly in Texas. At the point in Pivot where you're doing an introduction, you'll also play an introduction video so that students can get an idea of what they're about to see on the wing. So at the end of your little spiel, you will say, and now the cart driver is going to play an introduction video for you to get a better idea of what you're going to see in this wing. So I'll ask the cart driver to do that now. This prompts the cart driver to play that video. And that will be not just in Pivot, that'll be in Pivot and the Human Rights Wing. Another area that is really important to the tour is the photo analysis at the Kristallnacht photo. As I mentioned, we really market this and want this to be an interactive tour. We want students to get the most out of it. We don't want them falling asleep at their desks. So photo analysis and artifact analysis is one way that we try to do this. So let's take a look at an example of the photo analysis that we'll do at the Kristallnacht photo. You can see the photo here. The cart driver will move the cart really close to this panel, and then after you give a brief introduction, once you're ready to start the photo analysis, they will zoom in as close as possible so that they can see the photo. Your face does not have to, in fact, it should not be in this shot. So what I typically do is, after I have explained Kristallnacht, the general idea of what it was, I'll have my educator get super close in on this image, and I will explain to students that now we're going to look at an image from Kristallnacht. First and foremost, ask students what they see. You know, what is going on in this image? A lot of students will notice that there's a building that's on fire. You can explain that this is a synagogue and maybe ask them, depending on grade, but honestly is good for everyone, ask them what a synagogue is, a Jewish place of worship, right? See if they know that. If not, you know, you might have some more explaining to do. And then I prompt them to analyze our firefighters. Say, what do you think these figures are? What do you think are the white lines that are coming out of them? They're water, right? Students have no problems telling you that these are firefighters and these are the water hoses. If they haven't already said it, and many student groups will have already said it, I'll prompt them and say, what's odd about what the firefighters are doing? What direction are their hoses pointing? At that point, students will note that the hoses are not pointed at the synagogue that's on fire. In fact, they're pointed away from the synagogue. And so you can ask, what building is the firefighter trying to save? And of course, it's not the synagogue, but the building next door. You can also talk about our bystanders here in the front. Ask what they're doing. Explain they're not Jews. If they were Jews, right, they probably would have been, you know, hiding or scared, running away. Jewish men might have been arrested and sent to concentration camps. So this gentleman here. So who are they? What are they doing? This is a great image to explain how average Germans really participated in the persecution on Kristallnacht. So you can talk about maybe the complicity of firefighters. You can talk about bystanders. You can use the bystander behavior to now introduce upstanders. Do it how you like, do it how you feel best, but do it. Use this photo to give them that opportunity to analyze a photo. And for the cart driver, as the educator is asking all of these questions that I've gone through, the cart driver should be looking at the chat and reading aloud some of the answers as they are delivered.
Attacks happen on Jewish businesses, and thousands of Jewish men are rounded up and taken to concentration camps on Kristallnacht. We're going to actually analyze one of the photos that were taken on Kristallnacht, actually during the day. It wasn't just one night of broken glass, it actually happened over a period of 2 days here. So we're going to look at this picture. And I want to see, what do you all see in this photo? What are some details you can identify happening here?
There's people trying to mitigate the fire.
Oh, very good. People trying to mitigate a fire. So you've already identified that these people down here, these are fire hoses. Good. And this is a fire. This building is on fire. This is a synagogue. My question for you is, the firemen who are trying to put out a fire, where are their hoses going? Are they going towards the synagogue?
No.
No, yeah. They're actually going to this building next door. So there's an Aryan building, business building next door to the synagogue. They are making sure that the fire of the synagogue doesn't spread to the Aryan building. They're not putting out the fire in the synagogue. They're making sure it doesn't spread, right? Firemen are not part of the Nazi party. They don't work for Hitler, right? They are just doing their job as Germans. But this goes to show us, right? If they are containing the fire here and not letting it spread here, that they're already a part of that system, that social level of persecution, right? They've bought into this idea of us and them between Jews and Aryans. Who else do we see in this photo?
Child.
A child, right? A couple of children here. There are children watching this happen, right? They're there, they're looking on. Parents brought their children to watch synagogues burn, to watch this night of broken glass happen. And this is really where we talk about bystander behavior here, right? The firefighters, the children, they aren't part of the SS. They don't, they're not part of the Nazi party. However, they are present. They are watching what's going on. And we're really at our museum, what we want to talk about is that difference between, I think most people view bystanders as passive, but we like to talk about here that bystanders are active. They are there. They're actively making a choice to stand back and watch and do nothing. The firemen are actively making a choice to put out the fire, to not let the fire spread to the Aryan building and not put out the fire in the synagogue. So that bystander behavior doesn't help a victim. It's not passive. It is active. It only helps the perpetrator.
Next, let's take a look at an example of artifact analysis. So one place that we do an artifact analysis is at the yellow patches case with these yellow stars of David. This is, of course, where you would explain that Jews were symbolized during the Holocaust by being forced to wear yellow stars on their clothing. And one or some examples of ways that you can engage the students and ask them to analyze these artifacts is using the following questions. First and foremost, very easily, what do you notice about these patches? Students will note the color, they'll note the differing size, they'll definitely note that they all have different words on them if maybe they don't know that they're all different languages. And then, depending on how they answer, go ahead and ask follow-up questions. So, for example, if they note that they're yellow, ask, why do you think they're yellow? I usually say, yellow doesn't have any particular significance in, Judaism or in Nazi ideology, right? So why might these stars be yellow? If that isn't really prompting them, you can go on and say, what do you think of when you see a yellow sign or yellow tape or a yellow cone? What does that tell you? Caution, right? Stay away, danger. So explain how that is, an example of symbolization as well as kind of dehumanization for this Jewish population. Ask them, why do you think the patches are in different languages? What does this tell you about Germany? What does this tell you about the countries that speak these languages? And then explain that the stars look different because they're based in different geographical locations. It points to a couple different facts, but one being that the Holocaust does not just take place in Germany. Germany is expanding and occupying different countries. Again, the cart driver will stand simply right in front of this artifact case, zoomed in on the artifacts, and as the tour educator is asking questions, the cart driver should read aloud some of the answers in the chat.
We're headed to our next stop where we're going to analyze symbolization during the Holocaust. Symbolization is a part of the process of genocide. Symbolization is when victims during a genocide are marked for murder. So they either are given something to wear or it's something that they already wear that allows everyone to know that this person is a part of the victim group. During the Holocaust, does anybody know how Jews were marked for murder? What were their symbols?
Star.
That yellow star, very good. So we're going to look at our artifact case right here. We have a bunch of examples of that Jewish Star of David, that yellow star that was forced upon Jews during the Holocaust. You can see here inside these stars, they all look different. They're all shaped differently, right? Some of them have a banner around it, some of them don't. But you all see that inside the word Jew is there in different languages, right? If it was German, if it was French, if it was in Russian, right? There are all these different languages because of all the different territories and countries that the Nazis conquered. Jews were also persecuted in those areas as well. So there was a reason that the color yellow was chosen by the Nazis for the symbol of the Jewish star to be put onto Jews. Normally, the Jewish star, the Star of David, would not be in yellow in Judaism. It was chosen for a reason. When you think of caution tape around an area, a crime scene, or a yellow cone somewhere, what is that yellow telling you?
That something's dangerous.
That something is dangerous, exactly. It's like a warning, right? This is dangerous. Do not come over here. Do not cross. Yellow star was doing the same thing. That star was bright yellow, danger. The Jews were seen as dangerous by the Nazis and other.
Next, let's talk about summarizing information specifically in the death camps area. We all know that there is so much information in the museum that it is our job to filter out important information. So in this slide in particular, we'll talk a little bit about what the main idea of death camp should be, as well as how best to get across that main idea. So for the educator, it's important not just at this section, but throughout the tour to ahead of time before your tour, determine what the main idea, what you want the students to get across. For death camps, the main idea should be what is a death camp and what is the difference between a death camp and a concentration camp. So if you do nothing else in the entire death camp section, should explain that a death camp is created for the sole purpose of murder. When Jews arrive at a death camp, they will be murdered. And how can you do this without, talking for 45 minutes about each of the 6 death camps and how they differ from concentration camps, right? We could talk forever about this, but how can we do this succinctly? First, I say give the main idea. Explain what a death camp is, 1 or 2 sentences. Then use the floor map to introduce the location of the death camps, explain that they're on train lines, and show that they're all in Poland. Then, instead of talking about each individual death camp, choose one to highlight, whether it be Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, Auschwitz, Chelmno, or Belzec. Choose one that you think the students would like to know about. So this is totally up to you, but I'd say it's also up to the students. If you feel that this is a super advanced group that clearly has a handle on the history of the Holocaust, clearly knows what a death camp is, and has heard of Treblinka and Auschwitz and Belzec, go ahead and use Chelmno as an example of a really interesting or odd death camp. For the most part, however, most of your groups are not going to have heard of death camps or know the difference between a death camp and a concentration camp. They might not have even heard the word Holocaust. In that case, it is probably going to be better for you to choose one of those quote-unquote pure death camps, one of those Operation Reinhard camps like Belzec, Sobibor, or Treblinka, because they are a very clear example of what a death camp is. By choosing one of the death camps to talk about, you can very well give an example of what a death camp is without having to explain all 6 camps. In addition to choosing one death camp to talk about, we also ask that you choose one artifact to talk about. And you can choose any of the 6 artifacts or any of the 6 artifact cases within the death camps area. And if you have questions about how best to make these artifacts interactive, please reach out and ask, or simply go back to the previous slide where we talked about artifact interaction earlier on in Showa 1 and 2. The cart driver in this section is responsible for showing that which the educator is talking about. Whether the educator is talking about the floor map, the cart driver should pan down to show the floor map, or if they choose, or when they choose a death camp, the cart driver should focus on the death camp and the artifact that the educator is talking about.
So when the boxcars arrive, they would arrive here at death camps after those day-long transports at one of the 6 death camps. And you'll see here on this map below me that Casey's kind of getting closer to. You'll see some like train tracks here. These are the transport lines, some of the transport lines. You can see they go as far south, from even taking Jews from Greece, from the west, from the east, all to these 6 death camps that were created right here in Poland, which is where a majority of the Jews were already living. So I'm going to say what the 6 death camps names are, and then I'm going to ask you if any of them sound familiar to you, if you've heard of any of them before. So we have Chelmno, Treblinka, Sobibor, Majdanek, Belzec, and Auschwitz. Have we heard of any of these camps before?
Yes.
There. Yeah, which ones? Or one? There might be one.
Belzec and Auschwitz.
Oh, good. You know Belzec too. Yes, Auschwitz. Belzec and Auschwitz. Very good. Auschwitz is one that most people know about when they think about the Holocaust. They think about Auschwitz. Why don't we know about Chelmno or Sobibor or Treblinka, but we know about Auschwitz? Well, let's talk about that. Auschwitz or death camps are different from concentration camps because death camps were created solely for the purpose of murder. If you're getting off that boxcar, you're being deported to one of these camps, you get off and you are going to be murdered. Removal of clothes, shaving of hair, straight to the gas chambers. There are very, very few survivors from death camps because its only purpose was murder. There wasn't a slave labor option. Auschwitz, however, and Majdanek are camp complexes. So they actually have a death camp and a concentration camp attached to it. They're a big complex. They're almost about the size of a Texas county. So you think about how big that is. So Auschwitz is one of those places where those famous selections would have happened. As Jews got off the boxcar, they would have been selected out for labor or death. Now, those selected out for labor had a chance of survival. Not saying they would, right? You know, even in concentration camps, Jews died of starvation or disease or just because they were murdered by the guards there, right? Or overworked. However, there's a chance for survival. So we have survivors from Auschwitz and Majdanek who we can hear their stories and we know what happened there, right? We have very, very few survivors from, let's say, Treblinka, which is the camp I'm going to highlight for you today. So even though we've heard about Auschwitz the most, Treblinka is actually the most murderous of all of the 6 death camps. So it was open for about 13 months, just a little over a year. It was only operating for a little over a year. And the death toll was between 870,000 and 925,000 people total. If you do the math, which I could not do in my head, but if you do the math, break that down, that's about 70,000 people per month. 70,000 people per month were murdered at Treblinka. And there are only a handful of survivors to tell us the stories of what happened there. We have a question. Is it true that German people would throw bread into cattle cars just to see Jews fight? I don't know if that's an accurate statement of how Germans, all Germans reacted. It's a possibility. I know that there are definitely examples of upstanders who saw prisoners and gave out food on some of the marches that they did, which we'll talk about later. I don't know specifically in my head an example of tossing food in just to see them fight, though, but it's something we could definitely look into. Yeah, again, remember they're enclosed, so that would have been really hard to get food into a boxcar, like the one that we saw behind. Good question, though. So I'm going to highlight an artifact from one of the death camps here that I want us to analyze together. Casey's going to zoom in on here for you. So these were actually artifacts found from Majdanek when Majdanek was liberated, and I want you all to tell me what you see here.
Old shoes?
Shoes, old shoes, yeah, good. And do we see any differences between the shoes? Maybe some of these shoes compared to this or these ones?
The heel?
The heels, yeah. So we can tell that these two have heels, so these are probably women's shoes here. These shoes maybe look more like men's shoes without that heel. What about this shoe in the front? Who do we think that shoe might have belonged to?
A child?
A child, right? It's really small. So I like to look at this artifact with students because this shows us really that Nazi ideology, right? It did not matter if you were a strong man, if you were a woman, if you were an elderly person, if you were a pregnant woman, if you were a child. If you were a Jew, you were being murdered. There was no grace given. There were no exceptions to Nazi ideology. A Jew was a virus, a problem. It didn't matter who you were going to be murdered because of that. So at Majdanek, over 450,000 pairs of shoes were found when that camp was liberated.
And finally, we'll look at how to conclude a tour. In the Holocaust Shoah Wing, you will conclude your tour at the New Lives, New Homes panel. Here you talk about how many survivors moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and this mural is images of just a few of those survivors. You can point out specific survivors depending on how much time you have, talk a little bit about their lives, but what's most important is at the end of the tour that you open up for question and answer and really encourage students to ask their questions. Try as best you can to leave at least 5 minutes for question and answer, but utilize any time you have left. Remind students that they can either ask their question by unmuting or putting their questions in the chat. And finally, let students know that every student will receive a coupon to return to the museum in person with up to 2 family members. Students are encouraged to come back to see not just the Holocaust Wing, but all that the museum has to offer and really explore on their own time. A lot of times they'll ask what time the museum is open, so go ahead and explain that the museum is currently fully open 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. 7 days a week. The cart driver should of course focus on this panel, read aloud questions and comments from the chat, and then once the educator gives the approval, they will end the meeting for all participants. This conclusion will look pretty similar in every single tour. Of course, it'll end with the question and answer and the information about student coupons, but depending on where you are, you won't talk about new lives, new homes. Instead, you'll talk about the 10 stages of genocide or the Embrace Ideals, Challenge Reality, Participate, and Repair wall. For the full tour, you will actually end in the memorial room, where you will, again, take question and answer and inform them about student coupons. Now let's look at some important stops in the Human Rights Wing tour. Reminder, this is not a comprehensive list, and you are required to read the educator script in its entirety. With that being said, we will look at the human rights poll at the UDHR wall. We will look at the introduction to the 10 stages panel at the definition panel. And finally, we will look at how to move from island to island and explain the stage of genocide. First, let's look at the poll. So the main idea at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights wall is to explain to students why it's important to know your human rights. If you don't know your human rights, they can more easily be taken away from you, so it's important that we are aware of our own human rights. Again, let's be interactive. Ask students if they know their human rights. If they say yes, ask them which ones. Ask students why it's important to know their human rights. Allow them to do the work for you, right? And then you can ask them if these rights look familiar. Why do they look familiar? What are they coming from? And then that really allows you to talk about that American influence on this document. Talk about Eleanor Roosevelt, right? Once you've kind of laid out this concept of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and maybe ask them one or two of these questions, you can indicate that you will now launch a poll which asks students to choose one right that they didn't know before but think is really important. You are responsible for being very clear in asking your co-host to launch the poll. I literally say, now we are going to launch a poll. Poll person, please go ahead and launch it. This indicates to the poll person to start the poll and then really give time for the students to vote. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't say, all right, is it over? Is it over? Is it over? Is it over? Did you vote yet? Wait. The cart driver will let you know when the poll has ended, and they will let you know the results. Once you have the results, do something with them. Ask the students why they chose that, or give an example of when that right was taken away, right? Maybe you can use the Holocaust or instances in US history to talk about a time when, for example, right to rest and leisure was taken away from someone. Don't just let them take the poll and then forget about it. Interact with the students. The cart driver at this point, of course, is going to focus on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They will share the results of the poll with the educator, and they will read aloud answers in the chat as they come through.
1948, the UN created a commission to draft a universal Declaration of Human Rights. The chairwoman appointed to that commission was our very own Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was instrumental in getting the 9 authors from all across the world, Chile, Argentina, China, Canada, and the US to come together to decide on what our universal human rights should be. They created the document and they released the document in 1948, and you can see a lot of the rights that are listed in the UDHR right here beside me. And now I want to ask you, I want to give a poll here and see which right do you think is important but you haven't heard of before. I want you to go ahead and select one that we can talk about.
Next, let's look at how to introduce the 10 stages of genocide. Again, like I mentioned, it's important that we know the main idea of every stop we're at and can summarize that in one sentence, right? So the main idea at the panel, which will be right around here, is that the 10 stages of genocide happen in every genocide, and together they form the full process of genocide. So either here or at that blue introduction wall, you should explain that the Genocide Convention made genocide a crime and one that is punishable, but we still needed a way to prevent it, and a man by the name of Dr. Gregory Stanton, created an educational model to better understand the process of genocide and to be aware of when genocide is happening. At this panel, then, you should read the 10 stages of genocide to the students and explain that this gallery will show each stage through the lens of a different genocide. Other information that is important at this point, explain that the stages are not linear, they build upon one another, and they are not inevitable. Prevention can happen at almost every point. Then set up the rest of the 10 stages, then set up the move from island to island. You will go from stage to stage, giving an example of each stage in a historical genocide. Let them know that this is a very complex topic and to ask questions in the chat or by unmuting. The cart driver stands in front of the panel and relays questions to the educator. In the following video that you're about to see, Charlotte is giving a sample tour to docents explaining what should be done at this panel. She's talking directly to you, not to a group of students, so that's important to know as well.
Now, you can see those stages right here, and I'm about to read them. Classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial. Docents, listen here. I really took my time to read them. If I go classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, nobody's going to follow that. So take your time, pronounce them, especially wearing your mask. Pronounce all of these, especially if you have sixth graders or younger students. That is very key in giving that. Also, when I answered the question, again, this was a sensitive question. Don't say yes or no. Try to make this a learning moment, right? I turn it around with saying, great question, but let's look at this gallery first, and then maybe you can discuss it in school, right? So make sure, again, to use any question as a learning moment, and especially great questions like that, is to not just wave it off or freak out. So practice answering questions and difficult questions to questions you might not know the answer to or you don't really want to answer. Try to find different ways to make it still a learning moment and to give those answers like I just did right here. Okay, the next part is that I want to let you know that these stages are not linear. Ooh, linear is again another big word. That means that they don't follow each other necessarily. They can come in different ways. I always say a lot of times these stages pair up together. I call it the Texas two-step, like the dance. Yes, I'm a little dorky, I'm sorry. Docents, notice here, this is a long tour. An hour is a lot for those kids. Sometimes you can be a little dorky. Again, it creates that communication with them, making them to understand as well that we're all human beings here, and to give a little. I'm like, this is a lot of heart. I'm like, we've talked Holocaust, trials, human rights, and now we're talking about genocide. So creating some lighter moments is okay. Just keep it, decent, right? We all know how to keep it still a little professional in that sense. Okay, so now we have looked at the 10 stages of genocide. Behind y'all can't see it. I am actually looking at it. Is this big gallery, and Clara is going to just kind of swoop over it as I'm going to my next stop to kind of give you a glimpse of it. So we're going to move very slowly, and I'm going to move to our first stop, which is classification. And we're going to, at each stop, look at the definition of that genocide, of that stage, and then look at how it occurred in a certain genocide. Are y'all ready?
You can see in this video how Charlotte explains that her cart driver, in this case Claire, will do X, Y, and Z. She'll do this, she'll do that. Again, this is important because it helps both the cart driver and the audience to better know what to expect. And this happens in real life too, right? When you have in-person tours, you don't just start walking away from your students as you move to the next stop, right? No. You say, all right, now we're going to move on to talk about Guatemala, right? And the students then know to follow you. It's the same in virtual field trips as well. And now we get to the point where you're going to explain the stage of genocide and the historical genocide, which we use as an example. This is really where a lot of our docents get tripped up. And so I want to be very clear. The goal of the 10 Stages of Genocide Gallery is to highlight the 10 stages of genocide. And we do that by using an example from a historical genocide. So in the virtual field trip, you have a very short amount of time to get across a lot of information. And the best way to do this is to, first and foremost, define the stage. So, in Guatemala, this is the stage of classification. So what you will do is define classification. Classification is splitting people into groups, us and them. It's very normal. Every society does it, and it's not a bad thing unless it is paired with hatred or violence. An important note about the definition. It will get boring if you read word for word 10 definitions. So break it up a little bit. One time you read word for word the definition. One time you summarize the definition. The next time you ask a student to read the definition. The next time you ask a student to summarize the definition, right? So really make it interactive and really switch it up. Because there are 10 different stops in this gallery, it can get boring very easily. So really try your best to split up and make it a little bit more engaging. So once you have read the definition, explained the definition fully, say now we are going to look at an example of classification using the Guatemalan genocide. Give a very, very brief explanation of the Guatemalan genocide. I try to keep it to 1 sentence, 2 sentences max. So in the case of the Guatemalan genocide, this is part of a civil war in the 1960s that lasts about 30 years, in which the Mayans were murdered by their own government. That's all you have to say. Then you explain how classification was used in the Guatemalan genocide. Explain it through the use of a single object. And each island is given a specific object that you are asked to talk about. You can find this information on the 10 stages cheat sheet in Moodle. So in the Guatemalan classification island, you are talking specifically about our Mayan indigenous warrior Tekun Uman, who was this figure here in the center. Ask the students, what does this man look like? What are some distinguishing features? He looks like a warrior, right? They're using dark colors to portray him. And explain that indigenous Mayans were classified by the Guatemalan government as warrior-like, as dangerous, because of some of their historical figures like Tekun Uman. In that, I guess I used maybe 5 or 6 sentences, you have now explained the stage of genocide, briefly explained the historical genocide, and given an example of the stage in that genocide. It truly can be done in less than a paragraph. This is really important. If you are struggling with this, please reach out and we can work on it together. But seriously, take a look at that 10 stages of genocide cheat sheet.
At first, we're going to look at the stage and at the definition. Okay, can everybody kind of see the definition right here? If you can give me the thumbs up once we're standing still. Great, great, great. Okay, would anybody mind reading this definition to me? Yeah, wow, great job, great job. Thank you so very much. So classification, really, this first sentence says it all, right? Is basically a stage within genocide, is part of the process of genocide in which the society, cultures categorize people to put them, to distinguish them, into us versus them, right? Is basically during that stage we are grouping people together into categories, and the other category is the other, right? It's us versus them, right? When we create those categories. Now that stage, it doesn't necessarily need to be negative, but when that becomes part of the process of genocide and is being used for hate, that's when we get on the track of of genocide. And that is important to understand, because can we still stop genocide at this point from happening?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Most of these steps here, until we get to extermination, we can still stop genocide from happening. This is why the 10 stages are so important, that we need to recognize it, right? Because we can still do something about it. Okay, let's look at an example. We're going to look at the Guatemala genocide. So I'm going to let Claire get resituated as I'm kind of moving to. And we are going to look at the Guatemala genocide. That is a genocide that happened um, um, in the mid-1900s, where there was a civil war in the country of Guatemala. Can anybody tell me where kind of Guatemala is located? Maybe there's even somebody from Guatemala in the class. Okay, good guess. Good guess. Any try again? Maybe another continent? Okay, maybe in another continent where Guatemala could be located. Let's try again. Okay, that's okay. That's why we're here, right? We're here to learn. Guatemala is located in, oh, Claire says another answer just came in.
Definitely Africa. It must be Africa.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is actually, that's okay. You can take out maybe a world map after this tour. That is a great idea to look at the world. Geography is very important. But it is located in Central America. So it's actually not that far away from the United States. And again, mid-century, there was a civil war in Guatemala during which the government, which was a rightist government, was fighting against communist rebels. So it's kind of the right versus the left in that sense. And let me know if this is too high level, if I need to explain this more. Just let us know in the chat. And during that time, the government really started to reinforce that Mayans were dangerous and that they were going to align themselves with the communist rebels. So they started targeting Mayans for murder. And most of the Mayans at this point lived in these mountain villages. And so the government went in and attacked them and murdered many women and children and men with that. And I want to look at a specific part on the installation to really talk about that concept of classification. And that is this Mayan warrior right here. Do y'all see him in between the corn? I'm going to step out of view for just a second a little bit, but I'm still going to keep talking. Can y'all give me the thumbs up? Okay, what does he look like? Can you tell me what he looks like? Can you describe him?
Angry and
Angry, very good.
He has a hat on.
He does have some kind of headwear on. Yeah, great. What else what kind of colors? How, what else do you feel about him?
Dark colors like brown and black.
Yeah, great. He looks warrior-like. Does he look strong? Give me the thumbs up if you think he looks strong. Yeah, right. He looks muscular. He looks warrior. This is actually the famous Mayan leader, Tekon Unon, who led the Mayans to actually fight the Spanish colonists when they were trying to conquer the territory which is Guatemala today. And there's many sculptures and paintings of him, but he's always depicted as very angry and strong and warrior-like. And so over time, really not much over time, but as soon as the Spanish colonizers came in and throughout Guatemalan history, Mayans were depicted as warrior-like, dangerous, rebels. And so they were classified as that, as different, right, from others. And this kind of classification led to that consistency of classification and became what eventually became the Guatemala genocide. Okay, any questions? We're going to slowly move to our next island. Okay, docents, I am going to stop here for today because basically you would repeat this process, what I just did, over and over again.
Now let's turn towards home and look at the Pivot to America Wing Tour. A reminder, you must read the educator script to know where your stops are, but here is an example of 3 different stops in the Pivot to America Wing Tour and the education techniques that you can use at each. We'll first look at how to start polls and videos in the Texas Upstanders wall, how to talk about unconscious bias at the Beyond Tolerance Theater, and how to encourage students to vote in a poll at Call to Action. First and foremost, one of our very first stops in the Pivot to America Wing Tour is at the Texas Upstanders wall. At this wall, you have a couple different jobs, and they're all kind of split up into different quote-unquote stops. So first, you will define the term upstander. We all should know how to do that by now. Then you'll give a very brief explanation of the layout of the wall. Say there are 27 upstanders on this wall in 9 different categories, and even encourage your cart driver to pan so that they can see all 27 upstanders, the faces of all 27. Then explain that you're going to talk about one specific upstander by the name of Barbara Jordan, and you can have your cart driver follow you over to the image of Barbara Jordan on the top right of the wall. Give a very short biographical description of Barbara Jordan. If you need aids like papers or index cards at this point, you're more than welcome to use them. Then explain that you are about to listen to a testimony from Barbara Jordan. Say, my cart driver is now going to launch this video so that you can hear Barbara Jordan talk in her own words. At this point, it is the cart driver's responsibility to play the video of Barbara Jordan. If you are unsure yourself how to play a video, please see the cart driver training in Moodle. After you've played Barbara Jordan's testimony, please do not move on without speaking with the students about what they've just seen. Ask them questions. Ask them to highlight some key points of the testimony. Maybe say, what did you notice about Barbara Jordan? What did you notice about what she said, about the content of her speech? But what do you notice about how she said it as well? And then from there, there is another step at this wall. Now that students have heard from Barbara Jordan, they've heard from a Texas Upstander, now it's their turn to decide who they want to hear from. Explain that they will be given a poll of 10 different Texas Upstanders, and they get to choose which one they like. Which one they want to hear from. So again, you as tour educator initiate the poll. You say, all right, pollster, please launch the Texas Upstanders poll. Be patient. Allow for 60 seconds, 90 seconds to pass before discussing the results. And when the results come back, explain, all right, my cart driver has just let me know that Jesse Daniel Ames is the upstander that you want to hear from. Then give a brief bio of that chosen upstander. Again, this is where those notes come into play. After that very brief description or biography, you once again will prompt your cart driver to play a video testimony of that upstander. And once the video has completed, discuss with the students. What did they see? What did they notice? What stood out? Why is this person considered an upstander, do they think? Again, be interactive. Encourage students to get their voice out there, to be heard.
And where we're actually going to begin our virtual tour today is our Texas Upstander Wall. This wall is filled with 27 different Texas upstanders, meaning people right here in Texas who stood up for what they believed in, right? They saw something wrong and they worked to make it right. So they either stood up for themselves and they combated injustice, inequality, or unfairness, or they stood up for other people and their rights. They saw something, saw others were being treated unequally, so they stood up for them. So as you can see here on the wall, they're broken down into 9 different categories depending on who they were an upstander for. And I'm going to highlight one of those upstanders for you today first, and that is going to be in our politics category with Miss Barbara Jordan. And she is right here on the top right. All right, Miss Barbara Jordan was born in 1936 right here in Texas, in Houston, Texas. She grew up, she went to school, and she eventually became a lawyer. When she was back in Houston practicing law, she noticed that there was a big inequity in the number of African Americans registered to vote in Texas. So she started to dedicate her time in helping African Americans in Houston register to vote for the 1960 election. This really got her interested in politics, and from there, she became the first African American to serve in the Texas Senate. She also became the first African American woman from the South to serve in the U.S. Congress, and she became the first African American to give the keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1976. We're actually going to listen to a part of her speech right now. As you're listening, I want you to think about how she sounds, what is she saying, and what her message is, and if that message is still relevant to us today. So we're going to go ahead and listen to that now.
A nation is formed by the willingness of each of us to share in the responsibility for upholding the common good.
All right, so you can hear in Barbara Jordan's speech her passion, how she felt about this country and what she wanted for the country, right? She told us that we all need to participate in order for our government and our society to work. And I think that message still rings true today, which is why we choose to play that one specifically for students. However, we do give students a choice on the next upstander that they want to hear about. This is the really interactive part of our tour, one of the interactive pieces. So actually now you're going to see on your screen a poll is going to pop up. We actually let the students choose which upstander they want to hear from next. We picked an upstander from each of the 9 categories for students to make their selection for. So maybe they've heard of those names, maybe they haven't, but beside the names, you'll see the category that upstander was with, and that might help the students decide. So your kids will be able to choose an upstander. We would see that vote in live time. I would then go in to talk about the background of that upstander they chose, and then we would also play a piece of their testimony, just like we did with Barbara Jordan.
Now we'll look at unconscious bias at the Beyond Tolerance Theater. It is a little difficult to describe unconscious bias, but that is your job as the educator in this section. So, when you are walking over to the Beyond Tolerance Theater after you've talked about the Piccadilly cafeteria, introduce what the theater does. It teaches us about unconscious bias, and then you can even ask the students, have you heard of unconscious bias? What does unconscious bias mean? If that seems like too big of a question, split it up again. What does unconscious mean? And everyone knows, right? They'll all say passed out. What does bias mean? You know, having a stereotype or having, you know, feelings towards something. And say, yeah, exactly. Unconscious, when you're passed out, you're unaware. Bias, having an inclination one way or another, leaning one way or another. And then explain that you are about to play a video that gives 4 different examples of different types of unconscious bias. At that point, encourage, or rather ask your cart driver to play the Beyond Tolerance video, which lasts about 6 minutes. And then after the video, once again, don't run to your next stop. Take a second and debrief. Ask the students, what is one type of bias you learned about? Which one stands out the most to you? And if it's a particularly chatty group, go ahead and ask them a more difficult question. Have you ever witnessed bias, either in yourself or in others? If they're a little bit quieter, you can ask them just to reflect personally. Say, you don't have to say this out loud, you don't have to put it in the chat, but think about a time where you witnessed bias either in yourself or in others. And think about how you could have maybe approached that situation differently or better. And finally, let them know that we will share the quote-unquote ways to repair unconscious bias with their teacher. Their teacher actually already has this link and will be reminded of it at that point. Unconscious bias is a really great way that students can think about how they are moving on their journey to be upstanders. So really utilize this moment. Don't just play the video and keep walking. Really engage with the students at this point as well. Finally, let's talk about the poll and call to action. At this point, the educator will stand next to the call to action monitor, and the cart driver will zoom in onto the screen until you're like literally 1 foot away and you can read all of the words on the screen. The tour educator will explain the concept of the call to action gallery. This is the student's opportunity to find what they're interested in and to really begin to participate in that repair, to find organizations that they can volunteer with, that they can get involved with. All in one kind of flick of the hand, go ahead and select group Dallas under 18. You don't have to walk through this with the students. They're not going to understand what it means anyways. Just go ahead and do it on your own. Group Dallas under 18. From there, you will initiate the poll. Say, now we are going to find what area of interest you all are interested in volunteering in. So we are going to launch a poll and you will get to vote on that area of interest. The poll will pop up, you will have the results read to you by the cart driver, and they will let you know what the top choice is. So let's say the top choice is children. You then click children and scroll through the organizations. I typically say, look at all of the organizations just in Dallas that are working to help children or to help XYZ topic. You might want to select one organization and very briefly discuss it as an example, but let them know that their teacher will be receiving a list of organizations that they can volunteer with or continue to explore more ways to volunteer. Questions and next steps. For any questions you have, go ahead and email me, Casey Bush, at cbush@dhhrm.org. Next steps. As virtual field trip educator, you are required to also complete the cart driver training. This is available in Moodle as well. Once you have completed this training, as well as the cart driver training, scroll down to the bottom of our virtual field trip training page and complete the quiz. After you've completed the quiz, you are required to set up a time to shadow a virtual field trip in 2 forms. You should follow both in person and virtually via Zoom. So what this means, you can do it in any order, either first in person or first virtually. but you should follow one where you actually come into the museum and follow a cart driver and an educator to see how they do their tour, how they communicate as cart driver and educator, what stops they are very interactive at, what stops could use more interaction. You should also follow a virtual field trip via Zoom. This means that you are at home joining virtually and seeing the virtual field trip from the perspective of the student. This allows you to better see what works and what doesn't work from the perspective of the student. Where you could have used more interaction, where you could have talked a little bit more to the students, or where you could have stopped for questions. In order to set up these times, please email me as well, and I will let you know when we have in-person and virtual field trips. And once you have completed those 2 shadows, one in person, one virtual, you will then need to complete the discussion board in Moodle. This discussion board will ask you what you have learned in your opportunities to shadow, and that will complete your virtual field trip training as an educator. Once you have completed your discussion board post, I will be in touch with you to finish your evaluation so that we know you are ready to begin as a virtual field trip tour educator.